shocked by the harshness of the world. I'm often shocked by how harsh and how hostile, how heartless and how hateful some people can be. It is staggering to note the potential humans have for destruction. Some of the stuff we read in the local papers, and some of the stuff we see on national TV speaks into this. There is this lust for power out there. This greed for lots and lots of money. There's the want to control and the unwant to forgive. And all of that stuff has made the world an unkind place. An ungentle place, if there is even a word such as that. It is the survival of the fittest out there, isn't it? I watch a lot of action movies, when one is a minister, one needs all the distraction one can get, and so I love action movies, but some of these action movies nowadays have so much violence in them, I only get halfway before I feel utterly sick. I feel like I need to switch off the TV without even finding out who the murderer is. Just find all the bloodshed and all the aggression nauseating. A lot of what we see out there is the stuff that darkness is made of, and it goes directly against what Jesus taught and lived out. For Jesus very clearly announced a different kind of lifestyle. And he came after all to introduce another kind of kingdom, where might is not determined by how strong your guns are, but how intently and intentionally you love. And so the people of his day were astounded by this new brand of kingdom, by this new teaching of unconditional, sacrificial, and generous loving. Jesus insisted on the alternative. And Jesus over and over and over again said to his disciples that they should be marching to the beat of a different drum. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus drops a little bit of a bombshell. Mark chapter 10 verse 45, where he says, the Son of Man, namely himself, the Son of Man apparently never came to be served. Can you imagine how that unsettled the hearers? Because they were quickly and without warning trying to turn Jesus into this icon, a celebrity of New Testament times, if you like. And if Jesus didn't stop them in their tracks, he would have turned into an icon who they would have served left, right, and center. And Jesus actually put up his hand and halted them right in their path and said, I don't want any of this. For guess what? I never came in the first place to be served, but to serve, and also to give my life as a ransom for many. And as if that was not surprising enough, Jesus goes up a notch in John chapter 13, where he puts his money where his mouth is, where he lives up to that word that he had so faithfully spoken in Mark chapter 10, saying, I don't want to be served, I want to serve rather. Because in John chapter 13, Jesus did what no one else thought he would ever get up to. And that was going onto his knees grabbing a hold of a towel and filling the basin with water. And shock, horror, washing the feet of those he ended up calling his friends. And that, dear people of God, that is the gospel. Not only did Jesus live and die and rise again to get us into heaven, he also lived and died and rose again to get heaven into us and to actually succeed in making us a different kind of people. And so we have this amazing example of hospice and a selfless service to our community. For Fran, I'm willing to take a bet, not that I'm into gambling, I'm a former Methodist after all, but just to say, from where we sit, it looks like you and your team make all sorts of sacrifices to be there for others. It looks to us as if you never ever count the cost. That you've got it down to a T, always putting yourself second, if not third. For your patients matter to you to that extent. And so what I see in hospice's labor of love is the Jesus model. And I think it's the ministry that Jesus would not only have said yes to, but the ministry that he would definitely affirm. In Matthew chapter 9, the gospel author there writes about how Jesus did this funny thing of visiting all sorts of towns in the area. And Matthew actually records that Jesus went from town to town, from city to city, from community to community, and that Jesus ended up very, what shall we say, very rattled with what he saw. For what did he see? He looked at the crowds and he saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd. In fact, the terms that Matthew uses are the terms helpless, hopeless, and harrowed. Matthew says that this is what Jesus witnessed as he went on his walkabouts and as he paid attention to the needs of the people. Then Matthew adds this verse. He says that Jesus saw the people in the crowds and he had compassion on them. The King James has the word pity, and the Amplified has the word sympathy. And of course, as poetic as those two words sound, they all come back to the word compassion, which is probably the best word for us to insert here, for it comes from the Latin, which means gut feeling. So as Jesus looked into the tired, perhaps even tear-stained faces of the crowd, this is what he saw. They looked lost. They looked like they didn't have a shepherd. They looked helpless. They looked hopeless. They looked harrowed. And then Matthew said to the reader, it's important for you to notice that Jesus had compassion on them. That it was really important for Jesus for people to know how precious they are. For people to know that every minute of life matters. And so as I continue with the sermon, this sounds like exactly what hospice does. Treasuring every patient, knowing that they are safe and accepted. It sounds like the stuff that the mission of Jesus was built on. It sounds like the very foundation of the kingdom of God. Further in the next chapter, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus builds on this theme of making sure that every person knows that they are cared for, that they are cherished by God. And so Jesus says there in Matthew 10, you know what? If God goes out of his way to look after 2 sparrows, what effort wouldn't he go to look after you, who are probably worth more than a whole lot of sparrows put together? Jesus then prepares his audience for the statement of the year. For in Matthew 10 verse 30, as Jesus makes this big fuss of just how important people are to him and how much he cares for them, Jesus says, in case you ever foolishly forget, keep in mind as often as possible that even the hairs on your head have been counted. It's Jesus using a ridiculous example of how well God knows us and how God will bend over backwards to see us well and looked after. When one zooms in on Matthew chapter 9, where Jesus sees the people like sheep without a shepherd, it's after that whole story where Jesus goes back to his followers. After Jesus had moved from town to town, from village to village, and see how sad and how desperate people were. It was then when Jesus called on his followers saying, hey guys, listen up here. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. It is in that context that Jesus drops that powerful statement. It's like Jesus went back with his broken heart home after his roundabouts, going to look for laborers of love, saying to his disciples, if you say that you are coming after me, this is the stuff that we will be getting up to. Healing lives, transforming households, and bringing change and restoration. When a passage is only found in one of the Gospels, it is referred to as a Sondergut passage. So this record of Jesus going from town to town and village to village is actually not found in the other Gospels. Mark and Luke and John don't mention it, so that would make it a Sondergut Matthew passage. Are you with me? There's another passage which is a Sondergut Luke passage. So if Luke didn't include it, we wouldn't have it. Luke is the only one who tells the story in chapter 10 of the Good Samaritan. Now Jesus didn't only tell the story of the Good Samaritan because he was in the mood for a good story. No, there was a point. When you read what goes before the parable of the Good Samaritan, you will see that on this dramatic day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were trying to trick Jesus. And so they, every second day, perhaps every third day, went to Jesus with a controversial question. They were hoping in their heart of hearts that he would get it wrong so that they could have reason to eliminate him. And so this is exactly what happened in Luke chapter 10. I think he had already peeved off the Pharisees, and so now it was the Sadducees' turn. And so a Sadducee, probably with all sorts of fancy clothes, looking all holy in the face, approached Jesus saying, okay, I'll give this a shot. Let me try and trip him up. And so this Sadducee wanted to know from Jesus, you keep on talking about loving your neighbor. So now, give us a lesson on who the heck our neighbor is supposed to be. And so Jesus, in response to that seemingly controversial question, answers not directly, but in the story of the Good Samaritan. And I'm so grateful that Luke bothered to insert this parable for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have access to it. And so Jesus, pulling out a little bit of an entertaining flair, tells this colorful story. Apparently, a Jewish man one day was attacked. He was attacked and left on the side of the road, left for dead. There he was, bleeding profusely, perhaps even getting ready to breathe his last. And so Jesus continues, building his argument, saying that the first one who walked past this man was not an ordinary person, not a lay person. No, Buddha. Jesus knew his stuff. Jesus knew that if he wanted to get his point across clearly, that he would have to have a priest as part of the narration. And so you need to imagine now in your mind's eye this poor Jewish man having been attacked by robbers that had emerged from the woods. And there he was, not having safely arrived at his destination, which was Jericho. So there he was, bruised and battered by attackers. The first one, Jesus uses this now as part of his storytelling skill. Jesus says the first one to walk past him was a priest. So you need to imagine somebody with a religious look. Now, probably somebody with your kind of look, Bruce. Okay? So just imagine somebody looking like Bruce, perhaps with a little bit of an elaborate cloak on, walking past this poor man on the side of the road. Luke tells us that this priest, supposedly a man of God, servant of the temple, walked a wide berth around this man, not wanting to go near him with a 10-foot pole. And I am always taken aback that a priest, somebody who should have had a life-giving relationship with God, could get away with something like this. But Jesus, of course, wanted the story to knock the listeners sideways. So somebody who was supposed to represent the faith, somebody who was supposed to act on God's behalf, didn't get the point. Didn't paint the picture. So the priest, seeing this man, quickly looked the other way, pretending as if he wasn't there, ignoring him altogether, and probably whistling a pleasant tune to himself, which would make this whole scenario more bearable. And so there went the priest, looking like Bruce over here. The second man Jesus inserts into the story of the Good Samaritan is also a pseudo-celeb of New Testament times, a Levite. They were also sort of half-priestly, weren't they? After the lines are a bit blurred there. Anyway, also somebody respected, that people respected, somebody who people looked up to, somebody who people would go to for advice and spiritual guidance. This is the clout of the man who walked past this bruised man lying on the side of the road. And you know, the scripture doesn't say that the Levite did what the priest did. Apparently the priest looked at him and then moved past as fast as his legs could carry him. Apparently the Levite looked down on him. And I don't know if that's better or worse. Probably worse. But the Levite apparently looked on this man, and without showing 1 inch of pity, also got the heck out of Dodge. So somebody society expected to help. Somebody society expected to show leadership. Somebody who was supposed to know what to do in that circumstance. He also evaded the desperate need of this dying man. And then, by now Jesus was probably losing his audience, so he inserted a third man into the story. You know, me and my 3 points. Maybe that's where I get it from. The third man into the story, a Samaritan, which of course has very little effect to you now as you listen to me. It would have had a very different effect in Jesus' day, because the Jews and the Samaritans did not see eye to eye. In fact, they loathed each other. And I think this was a master move by Jesus to go to this extreme by inserting a Samaritan of all people into the story. You see, Samaritans didn't speak to Jews, and Jews didn't speak to Samaritans. This hatred, this bitterness, this unforgiveness went back centuries and centuries and centuries. But can you see how Jesus, in one single parable, breaks down all our preconceived prejudices? Jesus says, if you are to be in the caring business, you better care for all, no exceptions. So the Samaritan sees this battered, broken man and stops, jumps off his donkey, which was his mode of transport, and then tends to this man. It's now obvious where Jesus wanted to go with this story, but let me finish. The Samaritan didn't only find bandages somewhere and maybe a bit of mercurochrome, remember? To bind up his gaping wounds. No, he also found some food to give him a snack so that he could feel better and be strengthened. But not even there is where it ends. This Samaritan then goes the extra mile, quite literally, for he then loads this poor, bruised man onto his donkey and travels to the next town while he walks beside his own donkey. As they reached the town, he found an inn. And don't fall off the edge of your seat now, but this Samaritan even went as far as paying for food and lodging for the next couple of days. Now, if this story doesn't shout out that you and I need to love others out loud, then I don't know what does. In New Testament times, the Samaritans and the Jews had no contact. So if anybody wanted, if Jews wanted to go from Galilee in the north to the south in Judah, in Judea where Jerusalem was, where the temple stood, they would have to cross over Samaritan territory. For Samaria was here, Jerusalem was here, and Galilee was up in the north. You're going to probably battle to palate what I say next, for it is this. The Jews would actually refuse to walk on Samaritan soil. They would actually, right up here in the north, cross the Jordan River, go down on this side, evading Samaritan territory, and then as they reached Jerusalem, they would here in the south cross the river again and so get to the temple and its festivals. That is the crazy extent to which the bitterness and unforgiveness still raged in Jesus' time between these two groups. But Jesus says, in the kingdom of God, things look different. And how we live our lives is also always different. Jesus said to the audience, and clearly to the upset Sadducee who came to him with a question in the first place, who is your neighbor? Jesus' answer says it's not only the folk who live next to you, but anybody who is in need, anybody who is feeling lonely, anybody who's feeling forgotten, anybody who's feeling sick, anybody who is fearful, anybody who has been brutally wounded by life. There's another instance in which a teacher of the law tried to corner Jesus. The story is written in Matthew chapter 22. It looks like these Pharisees and Sadducees were just always on a roll. They really wanted to get evidence against Jesus so that they could crucify him. So at every opportunity they found, they would throw difficult questions at him, hoping that he would dismissively fail in answering them. This time around, it wasn't a Pharisee. I never liked them because they're not fair, you see. Not that I ever liked the Sadducees because they were always so sad, you see. This time around in Matthew chapter 22, it was a teacher of the law, an expert in the Torah, namely the first 5 books of the Bible. A professional in all 613 laws written in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, is it Leviticus first? You know what I mean. Genesis, Leviticus. You know the 5, okay? It's been a long morning. I'm not going to try and prove anything. In the Torah, the law of Moses, the Pentateuch. A teacher of the law would have known every dotted I and every stroked T of those 613 laws found in the law of Moses. In fact, they probably would have memorized them verbatim. And so the teacher of the law steps up to the challenge. It was now his turn to try and unsettle Jesus, the teacher. So he goes right in. Jesus, that's what they call him. Jesus, what according to your opinion is the greatest of the commandments? I have a strong suspicion of what I think the teacher of the law was hoping Jesus would say. The teacher of the law was probably hoping that Jesus was going to highlight the first commandment. That of God saying, you will have no other gods except me. There's no one else besides me. I will be God, your God, and that will be it. But surprisingly, that's not where Jesus went with his reply. The teacher of the law could also have really hoped that Jesus would go to the 4th commandment, because by New Testament times there had arisen an obsession with Sabbath observance. And so the teacher of the law probably thought that Jesus is going to emphasize how a Saturday needs to be observed from a Friday evening into the Saturday. That would be absolutely non-negotiable for him. By New Testament times, it was probably the main law of all. I cannot tell you the extreme measures the Jews of the time went to observe the Sabbath. And so the teacher of the law would have been satisfied if Jesus said, okay, the 4th commandment, the whole Sabbath thing. The teacher of the law would have been happy with that, happy and contented, and he would have left Jesus alone. But you take one guess what Jesus highlighted in his reply to the teacher of the law. Jesus, according to you, what is the greatest of all the commandments? Jesus said, it is where God says, love me with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your strength. And then for good measure, Jesus adds a line to that, and Jesus says, the second greatest commandment is exactly like the first. It's where you need to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Maybe the teacher of the law turned around disappointed. Or maybe he came up with another question to try and trip Jesus up. Jesus didn't feel tricked. Jesus himself must have felt very sad. For they just weren't getting it right. Not the Pharisees or the Sadducees, not the teachers of the law or the Levites. But Jesus uses the image of a humble Samaritan who knew that if he wanted to sleep soundly that night, he had to stop and help a person he had never seen from the of sin. I want to extend to you a kind invitation this morning. A kind but maybe a bit disturbing. I want to extend an invitation to you today. Saying that we need to get more involved with serving others and washing their feet without asking any questions and without any strings attached. And we need to perhaps on a larger scale start showing care and compassion to those who need it most. It's my prayer that after this full service today, that at least one person will go to Hope Street. I mean, how ironic is that? That's where hospice is situated, in Hope Street. That at least one of our members will drive in this coming week to Hope Street, to hospice's offices, to go and inquire how you can get involved. For there are lots of ways. You don't necessarily have to change bandages. You don't necessarily have to clean wounds. But there are lots of ways of ministering at hospice, aren't there, Frank? Lots of places people can serve. And I really trust that we as a church will always take seriously the building of a better world, a gentler future, and a kinder existence for all people. Let's get out there and love out loud. Mother Teresa, I end with this. Mother Teresa, at the end of her life, was interviewed by a local journalist. I suppose this person wanted to go and find out once and for all why Mother Teresa was in her 80s and still doing what she was doing. She was supposed to be retired, sitting on a stoop, sipping Rooibos tea or something. Anyway, she was already in her deep 80s, and Mother Teresa agreed to this interview, and this local journalist wanted to know from her, Mother Teresa, after all these years, why are you still continuing your work amongst the poorest of the poor of Calcutta? You know what Mother Teresa's classic reply was? She said to this guy, for before I drop dead into the dust, I would fain to do something beautiful for God. As we seek living lives of service for others, lives of ministry, changing the fate of this tired old world, living lives of care and compassion as Jesus taught us, I trust that our lives would end up being something truly beautiful.